It's like kids. All right, I'll just start. I'm going to wait 2 more minutes. Oh, the ambassador sat next to Michelle McNair. Should we go? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know who we are, I'm Byron Radcliffe, the Vice President of the QED Group and Chairman of the SID Board, and this is Catherine Rafelson, President of SID. Welcome to our annual gala dinner tonight, which is a night of celebration. And one thing we would like to do is take a moment to really celebrate a special thing, and that's after 5 years, Alan Gross, a fellow development professional and truly one of our own, was released from prison. I know you'll join me in celebrating this wonderful news and wishing all the best to he and his family.
There are many people who can speak to Ambassador Verveer's contributions to international development. We heard from Secretary Hillary Clinton, USAID Administrator Raj Shah, World Bank President Jim Kim, Secretary Madeleine Albright, and many more congratulating her on tonight's award. We have 2 of Ambassador Verveer's admirers with us here tonight to tell us more about what it is like to work with her. Luis Moreno, President of the Inter-American Development Bank, and Alyse Nelson, President and CEO of Vital Voices, will speak later this evening.
But before we start the main celebration, we want to take a moment to reflect on another extraordinary contributor to the field of international development who we lost this year and who we will all miss. And that's former Georgetown School of Foreign Service Dean Carol Lancaster. To say a few words about Carol, I'd like to introduce Asif Sheikh, who's an ex officio member of the SID board and last year's SID honoree.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you, Catherine. On October 22nd of this year, we, this community, lost Carol Lancaster in the prime of her career and the peak of her influence. She was a giant in development and in foreign policy. Carol Lancaster, Dean at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, was a scholar, a leader, a mentor, a role model, a loved friend, and a deeply loved member of her family. I was privileged to know Carol well, but there are many, many others in this room who knew her better and longer. So I cannot tell most of you anything about Carol that you do not already know. For you, and for those who did not know her personally, let me also note that it is difficult to say anything about Carol without paraphrasing what has already been said, because since October 22nd, there has been an outpouring of expressions of admiration and affection that have flowed from every quarter. 72 years. That is such a short time to accomplish anything of lasting significance. But with her boundless energy, and many of you knew Carol, her boundless energy, passion, razor-sharp mind, and a razor-sharp wit to go with it, she left a lasting legacy in so many fields that we can only step back and admire and mourn her loss. But I'd like to address Carol's family directly. Our loss is enormous. Yours is incalculable. Our our thoughts and prayers are with you. Thank you for letting us be part of her life. I'd like to share a brief personal recollection. I mentioned wit. Carol and I and two others were on a panel together commenting on a recently produced CSIS report a couple of years ago. I went first. As for those of you who know me, I sometimes do. I made a couple of brief remarks about the report and then went on to talk about things that I wanted to address. Carol was next. "Thank you, Dan," she said to the moderator. And then she turned and looked directly at me. "Asif, you have really been a naughty boy. You've talked about important issues, but you didn't really talk about the report." She was direct, but said it with a smile. I sensed that Professor Lancaster had just told me what I needed to do to get a passing grade. I cherished that moment. She spoke as always with friendship, warmth, but with authority. And I smile whenever I think of that. So let's take a few moments to celebrate the extraordinary mix of humor, purpose, and clarity that was Carol. She worked on the Hill. She worked at the State Department, where she became Undersecretary of State for Africa. She was the first woman deputy administrator at USAID, and she had a 30-year relationship with Georgetown University. She started her career at Georgetown as a student and was a Fulbright scholar. Carol was the first in her family ever to attend college. Defying expectations, something at which she was very good, she continued on to earn a PhD from the London School of Economics and ended her illustrious career as the Dean of the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, the first in her family ever to go to college. Now, the university issued a moving tribute, which many of you have read, to Dr. and Professor Carol Lancaster on October 22nd. And as I read the full tribute, I realized that just the headings of each of the sections, understanding that under each heading stood a lifetime of achievement, just the headings alone are themselves testimony to how much she accomplished and how much she meant to so many. To begin to understand the woman behind the august title of Dean, please just take a moment to listen to the headings under the title, Georgetown Remembers Revered School of Foreign Service Dean Carol Lancaster. Revered. The headings: Heart and Intellect, Sweet Spot, Judgment and Intellect, A Concerned Scholar, 6 Languages. And by the way, what were those languages? Spanish, French, German, Portuguese, Russian, and Arabic. Carol didn't just do things, she immersed herself in everything that she did. And by the way, by my count, that's 7, because as I recall, she is awfully articulate in English as well. Headings: Path-breaking work, Something special, A pioneering woman, Indomitable spirit, A First Lady's tribute from former First Lady and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, An important force, Cherished and respected, Touching many lives, First generation student, Transformative experience, Large extended family. Something unexpected, partially expected. Scholar, of course. Cook, gardener, musician. She had mastered the Celtic harp. Where did she find the time? And the final heading, a Washington love letter. You may want to know about that last heading, a Washington love letter. No, it's not some juicy gossip. Carol had hoped to complete her treatise on Washington before she died, and she referred to the book as her love letter to the city where she had lived her life and that she loved so dearly. And so here is what she had to say about that book. I have written a book about a city that in some profound sense owns me. I am interested, amused, annoyed, that's Carol, and sometimes inspired by the political theater and intellectual life of Washington because of the diverse and vibrant cultural life of the city and its natural beauty, which often, and sometimes unexpectedly, claims my attention and calms my soul. For any of us in this room who knew one or more facets of Carol, it is likely that there were dozens more that we did not know. Remarkably, she brought equal passion and drive, equal excellence to everything that she cared about. So much caring in one heart, so much energy in one soul. Carol Lancaster made a huge difference for Africa, for the downtrodden in the developing countries, for the many boards on which she served, including the board of this organization, the Society for International Development's Washington, D.C. chapter, for advancing knowledge, for inspiring the next generations of scholars and practitioners, for, in former Congressman David Obey's words, and I really think this characterizes her essence, demonstrating a hard-nosed, fact-based practicality that turns good intentions into good results. She didn't just break glass ceilings, she shattered them. She was trusted and admired by secretaries of state, members of Congress, and colleagues in government, academia, and worldwide. And I might add, also by our honoree tonight, Ambassador Verveer. Let me close by once again paraphrasing. This is something that was told to me by a close colleague about Carol. Carol Lancaster had the intellect to stand up to power, and she had the heart to stand up for the powerless. Carol, may the beauty you saw in unexpected places continue to calm your soul, and may your ability to see beauty teach us to see it as well and help us calm our souls. You are loved, you are missed, and we celebrate you.
Thank you, Asif. In our eagerness to share the news about Alan Gross, we forgot to make our very important introductory comment, which I think all of you know, but to say why we are all here tonight. And that is to celebrate the achievements of an individual who has contributed in an exceptional way to the field of international development. And as you all know, this year we're recognizing Ambassador Melanne Verveer, Executive Director of Georgetown's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And I'm sorry we did not state that at the beginning. Those of you who were at last year's SID Washington dinner may recall that Asif closed his remarks by stating that he believed the greatest single change to shape the history of mankind will be the inevitable and unstoppable equality of womankind. Asif went on to predict it would prove to be the greatest social transformation in history. Someone who has worked hard to move the world towards this transformation is Baroness Mary Gowdy. Baroness Gowdy is a senior member of the British House of Lords and an advocate, a global advocate for the rights of women and children. She is involved in promoting gender equity with both the G8 and G20 and is also chair of the UN Women Leaders Council to Fight Human Trafficking. She serves on numerous boards, is an active blogger and Twitterer, and has been called a savant for her ability to push for change on big global issues. She is also a close friend and colleague of our honoree. Baroness Gowdy joins us tonight via a pre-recorded video tribute to Ambassador Verveer.
Good evening. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine, for asking me to be part of your evening in honour of my great friend, Ambassador Melanne Verveer. Melanne is very well known to everyone around the world. Melanne has at the heart of her being equality. Wherever she goes, it is about equality. And it was this great agenda that she has that she brought back from Beijing 20 years ago. Since then, we have all learnt about the Beijing agenda and what we're expected to deliver from that great agenda and how that agenda today and before has been widened. Melanne used the agenda to bring equality to women around the world through her work and helping to set up Vital Voices Global Partnership, bringing it out of the White House and making it into a global NGO. She gave it sustainability and funding, which is now today an even more thriving organisation than it was. Further, the work that Melanne did, trailblazing as the first ambassador for global women, visiting all countries of the world, taking human rights to governments, dealing with very difficult governments that we know do not like having these issues spoken to them at the most senior level. Melanne went to visit them, they accepted meeting her, and in some cases they took these agenda items forward. Her great phrase, keep with the agenda. When you ask her what's the new messages, keep with the agenda. Melanne is unflinching on the whole question of empowerment for women, equality for women at every level. Further, her work with the Institute for Georgetown Women, Peace and Security is so important at a time when women should be at every table and very much part of the peace negotiations around the world, because it is women who have to take care of their children, their husbands, their family, have to try and pick up the pieces after a war-torn or when they leave a war-torn country. Melanne has done so much work to take this to the top of the agenda in every country. She started this in many ways with her work with Prime Minister Blair and President Clinton in the whole question of Northern Ireland. Melanne has been unstinting in the course in human rights in Northern Ireland, including only this week did we have a conversation about this. Melanne, I'm so pleased that you're being honoured this evening, and I'm so sorry I'm not with you. Thank you, and goodbye.
Please enjoy your dinners and each other, and we'll resume the program in about 45 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to resume our program. Catherine. President Luis Alberto Moreno has been president of the Inter-American Development Bank for nearly a decade after serving as Colombia's ambassador to the United States for almost 7 years. As you all know, the Inter-American Development Bank's purpose is to work towards eliminating poverty and inequity while promoting sustainable economic growth in Latin America and the Caribbean. Under President Moreno's leadership, the Inter-American Development Bank has undertaken numerous initiatives focused on gender equality and empowerment of women in Latin America and the Caribbean. President Moreno is a strong supporter of gender equality, but also of development in general, and has used his distinguished career in both public and private sectors to work on many of the issues that all of us are passionate about in this room. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to President Luis Alberto Moreno.
Thank you very much, Byron, dear Melanne. Ladies and gentlemen, my compatriot, the late great author Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the most famous writer my country ever produced, once said that he believed that women hold up the world while men try to push history forward. Clearly, Garcia Marquez never met and knew of all the things Melanne Verveer has done. I first met Melanne and then Ambassador Verveer in 1998, shortly after I arrived in Washington and had the privilege to serve as my country's ambassador to the White House. We met at one of the many diplomatic receptions, this one in the White House. She was then the chief of staff of then First Lady Hillary Clinton, as we all know, and more importantly, a consummate Washington insider with decades of experience in helping push history forward. I was the natural nervous envoy of a mid-sized country with a tarnished international reputation and lots of problems. And we hit it off immediately. Naturally, it wasn't long before I learned about Melanne's passion for women's rights. And in fact, in one of our first conversations, she convinced me of the importance of recognizing them as human rights. To this day, whenever the issue of women's full and equal participation comes up in my work, and believe me, it comes up frequently, I always think of Melanne. Of course, she had been influencing people's views on the subject for many, many years, taking the cause of women's rights to the highest levels of the US and international policy making. She was instrumental, as we all know, in shaping the position that then the United States took in the Fourth World Conference on Women that was held in Beijing back in 1995. She helped create the Vital Voices Democracy Initiative to promote emerging women leaders around the world. And she continued and expanded the program in the private sector by creating an international NGO, the Vital Voices Global Partnership. Corporate programs such as Goldman Sachs' 10,000 Women Initiative, which provides training to female business owners around the world, greatly benefited from Melanne's guidance and inspiration. And back again in government, as we all know, she became the first U.S. ambassador at large for global women's issues. And for 4 years, she championed the rights of women and girls around the world, pushing particularly hard in countries where they are not fully recognized as equals. And now, at a point in life when others might slow down, she's leading Georgetown University's Institute of Women, Peace and Security, again pushing the boundaries on academic research. So Melanne is truly an inspiration and a model for anyone who is aspiring to change the world through both policy and advocacy. I must confess that when Melanne first won me over, I never thought the day would come when women's rights would become such a big part of my own job. And as president of the Inter-America Development Bank, rarely does a day go by without having to make a decision affecting the very nature of the cross-cutting issues of women's and girls' role in Latin America. Our region has seen a lot of improvements in gender equality over the past couple of decades. And I won't dwell on the question of political leadership, just to say that we've had recently 8 democratically elected female presidents in Latin America. And I am sure that all of you, like me, will love to see the day that the US follows the example of countries to the south. Is our export of good practices to the north. But Latin America is still catching up in areas where we lag behind other more developed nations. Young women are staying in school longer than young men. More than half of our university students today are women. Female participation in the labor market has increased significantly. Almost 50% of Latin American women work outside of their own homes. Their incomes and earnings were responsible for 30% reduction in our poverty rates. And today, more Latin Americans live in the middle class than ever before, over 50%. And this is all due in large part to women's participation in the labor force. But Latin American women and girls still face many problems that limit their ability to develop their full potential. Teen pregnancies, domestic violence, and male-dominated government and corporate power structures. And as a development bank, our work is cut out for us. I'm gratified that our loan portfolio with gender-related goals has quadrupled since 2010. The projects that we finance cover the gamut from access to credit and training for female entrepreneurs to expanding child care services for working mothers and establishing centers to support victims of domestic violence. I could go on for hours about our work and the things that we're doing, but for the sake of brevity, let me just say that we no longer have to push our member countries to look at development problems from a gender perspective. Since we are in Washington, I think we can say that the term mainstream without losing most of the audience. But I'd like to close with something that we're planning to do inside our own institution regarding gender equality. I was particularly moved by the UN's He for She campaign, which sought to enlist men as champions of feminism. And I truly believe this is a major cultural change, especially for societies where gender roles have been traditionally very distinct. So over the coming months, I will be inviting my male colleagues at the IDB to take part in an exercise to evaluate our own commitment to gender equality, both as individuals and as a corporation. So there you have it, Melanne. Your cocktail party icebreaker had quite an impact on this newcomer to Washington. Thank you for all your insight. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your work. And more importantly, thank you for your friendship. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President Moreno, for giving us even more reason to honor Ambassador Verveer tonight. Ambassador Verveer has served in a variety of roles throughout her career. One very important one, especially to those who benefited from it, was the role of mentor. We have with us tonight one of Ambassador Verveer's mentees, someone who says Ambassador Verveer saw the leadership potential in her long before she saw it herself. Alyse Nelson is a leader and mentor in her own right, using what she learned from Ambassador Verveer to pay it forward through her important work as CEO of Vital Voices Global Partnership. As most of you know, Vital Voices grew out of the Vital Voices Democracy Initiative, established in 1997 by then First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton and Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. The organization works today to identify, invest in, and bring visibility to extraordinary women around the world. Alyse has served as head of Vital Voices since 2008 and has been with the organization since its inception in 1997. In fact, she was Vital Voices' first employee, starting out as program director, designing and operating training programs to empower women from emerging countries to operate NGOs, create and operate businesses, and run for political office. And as I understand it from the math, she was 23 years old. Since then, she has been honored with numerous awards and was recognized as one of 10 women to watch by Washingtonian magazine, one of 150 women shaking the world by Newsweek, and one of the 55 most influential women on Twitter by Fortune magazine. Ambassador Verveer said of Ms. Nelson when she assumed the position of CEO, "She is a true visionary and has been an inspirational leader for our young, very talented, and growing staff." Now, to tell you more about Ambassador Verveer, please welcome Alyse Nelson.
Well, thank you, Catherine, and thank you for the Society for International Development. You know, it's not every day that you have the great opportunity to tell hundreds of people exactly how you feel about one of the most special people who has really shaped who you are in this world. As many of you know, and I think at this point in the evening, after hearing from Ambassador Moreno and Baroness Mary Gowdy, you know that Melanne Verveer indeed has a very impressive legacy of accomplishments. As the First Lady's Chief of Staff, she placed women's issues precisely where they belong in the mainstream of American foreign policy. She went on to found and is now the Chairman Emeritus of Vital Voices. She became our nation's first ever global ambassador, and today she continues to make sure that women's voices are not only heard, but seen as the key drivers to promote security and peace around the globe. I think pretty much all of us know Melanne basically doesn't sleep. But the legacy that you may not know, you may not be aware of, is the one that she's developed in individual people. Those of us who follow in her footsteps, those of us who are who we are today because of her. The many she has personally mentored, the thousands she has individually inspired, and the millions more who will probably never know her name. But believe me, they will feel the impact of her life's work. I am one of the fortunate few. I have known Melanne for 18 years. I am the product of the lessons she's taught me and her leadership example that she models. The first time I met Melanne, I was a 22-year-old intern at the White House. It was 1996, and I was so green. I was extremely inspired to be there and very excited. I had attended the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China, and I was lucky enough to hear then First Lady Hillary Clinton's speech where she declared that women's rights were human rights. It was my first week on the job when I joined a meeting about an event that the White House was going to plan to commemorate the one-year anniversary of that historic gathering in Beijing. Now, it never really occurred to me, being a new Washingtonian and a 2-day-old intern at the White House, that I was just sort of expected to sit along the side, listen, and take notes. But I felt like I'm part of something, and this is amazing, and I have input to give. Almost every single person around the table tried to shut me down, except for one. and that was the most powerful voice at the table, and that was Melanne, who said, "Wait a minute, I want to hear what she has to say." It was in that moment, and so many that have followed, that Melanne has taught me that every voice is valuable. Anyone who has an idea is worth hearing. It wasn't just that she enabled me to finish my sentences, it's that she showed me that a true leader uses her voice and her power to give voice, power, and space to others. A year later, Melanne made me part of the Vital Voices initiative, something that we were starting that was going to be historic, to empower women leaders around the world. It was groundbreaking. I was excited and passionate, but quite frankly, I had no business taking on that role. I was still very young, still very unexperienced, but Melanne took a risk on me. And I think by taking a risk on me, she gave me the confidence to take a risk on myself. In the late 1990s, we hosted the first Vital Voices conference. I remember between sessions, a group of women leaders practically ran towards Melanne. They were women from Ukraine. And in tears, they told her about how their granddaughters were disappearing, never to be seen again. It was a problem that had no name. Back then, the problem of human trafficking, well, there were no laws on the books saying that it was illegal. There were no international treaties. There was very little awareness. Melanne, a Ukrainian American, was horrified by the stories that they told her. And from that day forward, she made it her mission to stem the tide of human trafficking. So she brought leaders together across the political aisle and created a law to protect the victims in this country. 17 years later, 130 countries around the globe, because of Melanne's first steps, now have laws on the books to say that trafficking in persons is illegal. Melanne helped to bring... Melanne did help to bring the issue of human trafficking to the world stage, but in the process, she taught me a very valuable lesson. If you really are serious about making change, you've got to put your ego aside. You have to be willing to jump outside your comfort zone. You have to be willing to work with people who you might disagree with on some issues. You have to be willing to cross lines that typically divide to make lasting change. Melanne is more than someone that I look up to. She has been a stakeholder in both my victories and my disappointments over the last 2 decades. Sometimes she has thrown me into the deep end of the pool, given me extraordinary opportunities that I had no idea how to tackle, and I had to figure out how to swim, which is a great gift. And sometimes she's just given me the space to make my own mistakes, which quite frankly is an even greater gift. After Vital Voices became a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, one of the first big projects that we knew we had to do was hold this huge summit for women leaders, hundreds of women leaders from all over the continent of Africa. It was the largest event we'd ever put together, and Melanne had put me in charge. I desperately wanted to do a good job. I didn't want to let her down. Every detail had to be perfect. But when the beautiful program book arrived for the summit the night before, and all the women leaders coming in from all over Africa, as I was paging through the book, the program book, I noticed a terrible error. The plenary session entitled Leadership in Public Life, I had inadvertently left out the L in public. This was more than a typo. I was mortified. And I was thinking, okay, do I spend the next 10 hours going through every single book and adding L's? Or do I just tell Melanne? I decided that I would tell Melanne because, quite frankly, me and the entire staff needed to sleep. And when I told her, she really surprised me, and it's something that I'll never forget. She put her arm around me, and she said, "You know, Alyse, thanks to your great work, there's going to be a lot of important issues talked about over the next 3 days. And believe me, that typo is not one of them." I think what makes Melanne the kind of leader that you want to follow that you want to do well for is because of the certainty that she will always have your back. No matter how high she climbs, she is always in the trenches with you. And that makes you proud, really proud, to be part of her team. Over the years, she has celebrated my successes, both personal and professional, and she's helped me learn from my disappointments and missteps. She's taught me that failure is really not the opposite of success. It's actually a stepping stone to it. Melanne's the real deal. She's mission-driven. She's motivated by the possibility of positive impact. And even with all her impressive titles that you've heard about tonight, she always reminds me, not through her words, but through her actions, that titles mean nothing if you don't have the substance to back it up. And believe me, this woman has more substance than anyone I know. I am deeply aware that I would not be in the position that I am today if Melanne didn't take a chance on me. She saw leadership in me, as Catherine said, long before I saw it in myself. And think about it. I am just one. As we know, she's given this gift to hundreds, maybe thousands. I can't ever expect to pay Melanne back for all that she's given to me. But like so many she's touched, I feel compelled to pay it forward by mentoring others and by striving to live up to her example. Just think for a moment about what that means if you multiply that out. Just think about the power that she's unleashed in mentoring not just me, but so many others around the world. Political leaders on the front lines of change, women who are thrown in prison for what they believe and fighting for human rights and human dignity, women who are holding up their families and their communities and pulling them out of poverty, women who will go on to do great things, but you know what they'll also do? They'll mentor others because they learned it from Melanne. I honestly feel like behind me tonight are thousands of others who want to be here, who desperately want to have the opportunity to say to Melanne, thank you, and to tell her how much she deserves this award. So thank you, and thank you for including me in this night.
Thank you, Luis and Alyse, for your comments. Political appointee, entrepreneur, teacher, mentor, Ambassador Verveer has exercised her influence in so many different ways. She has championed the rights for women and girls in her many roles at the White House, on Capitol Hill, within the NGO community, and in academia. Her accomplishments on all those fronts are very well known. But she has also worked to advance critical areas of international development, including social development, democracy, and peace building. She's someone who takes charge, is persistent, and has made her mark on the world. Ambassador Verveer has often been recognized for her work through numerous honorary degrees and awards, including the U.S. Secretary of State's Award, as well as the Order of Princess Olga from the President of the Ukraine. Tonight, the members of SID Washington are proud to bestow Ambassador Verveer with SID Washington's 2014 Leader in Development Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Verveer.
Well, I hardly recognize myself in some of what's been said tonight. But thank you all so much. It's wonderful to be here with the SID family and so many who have done so much for global development, which I believe to be one of the noblest callings. You know, it's a wonderful reunion of friends here tonight, some of whom I haven't seen for a long time. The two previous awardees, my dear friend Maria Otero is here, and so many colleagues from government. I also want to acknowledge the Dutch ambassador, who hails from a country that has really pushed above its size to make a strong commitment to global development. And how can I thank Alyse and Luis? They sound like they go together. I am so grateful, as all of you are, I'm sure, for the commitment that the two of them have made over the years, because it represents so much of our common cause. And it is true, one of the smartest things I've ever done is recommend to the board of directors of Vital Voices that my successor should be Alyse Nelson. And there was a little bit of incredulity, not because people didn't think she was talented and competent, but she was so young. But I knew just how deeply she felt about these issues. And long before I had met her, I learned about this subsequently, was that she was a college student and determined to go to the Beijing Women's Conference, to the NGO forum that was purposefully put outside of Beijing so the women wouldn't make trouble. There were tens of thousands of them. And had I been her mother at the time, I would never have allowed her to go in the situation that she went. But she got herself on the plane, many planes, it turned out, to finally make her way to China. And in the process, on the last flight, I learned that she sat next to a woman from Africa who, as they spoke, acknowledged that she too was going to China for the conference. And she asked Alyse, "Where are you staying?" And Alyse said, "Well, I don't know." And this woman said, "Well, then you stay in our dormitory because clearly you need a place to stay." And she did, and it turned out that she was the only Caucasian in a dormitory reserved for African women. And she learned so much from that experience in Beijing that it was a turning point in her life, and she committed herself at a very young age to help women as long as she could, and continues to do that today. So that's the kind of person Alyse is. And Luis, he is indomitable. You know, I've never known him to be a nervous young diplomat, to be sure, even though he said he was. I did work with him when he was ambassador to the United States from Colombia, and now as president of the IDB. He's always been very visionary, dedicated, and possessed of a stamina that few can match. And I believe he's turned the bank into a very effective instrument for progress in Latin America, doing the hard work of reform, which doesn't come easy, and embracing policies that are making a difference, such as investing in women's entrepreneurship. Now, we always call Luis one of the good guys. He truly is for she, and he has made a remarkable series of commitments on policy at the bank. And I first met Baroness Gowdy when she was engaged in Vital Voices. As a member of the House of Lords, she has become an indispensable partner across the ocean on a range of issues, from the prevention of human trafficking to the promotion of women in peace and security. She's tireless and a true friend of the global development community. And tonight I especially want to thank SID and this leading DC chapter for the incredible honor that you have bestowed on me, for sure, undeserving as it is. But even more for all the decades in which you have been on the cutting edge of effective development, influencing both theory and practice in these tremendously challenging times, renewing, innovating, constantly engaging, appealing to common sense over dogma, and always advancing progress in this critical field. And so I want to thank Catherine and thank Byron for the leadership role you play, for the staff, and for all of the hard work that comes out of this extraordinary organization. So I come before all of you tonight, not as a development expert, I am not, but as an advocate and as a cheerleader, as someone who has come to see the indispensable role of global development for our country and for the world. And this has been the case for me over the last 20 years. From the early days working with then First Lady Hillary Clinton in the White House and her own journey to becoming a global leader on these issues, I have witnessed from Bangladesh to Bolivia the transformative power of development, as well as the effective investments that women and girls represent in lifting up communities and countries, economies and governments. In those White House years, girls' education and microcredit were only slowly coming into their own, in gaining traction among development leaders. And it's been a long journey to where we've arrived today. The journey is far from over, but we've made a great deal of progress. So my memory is like reels and reels of thousands and thousands of experiences over these couple decades. I remember the first trip that I took with First Lady Hillary Clinton, and Jan Piercy is here, she was on that trip, and the late Carol Lancaster was on that trip. And we went out to the Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA, in Ahmedabad, India, where women, many of whom had been rag pickers, were now, through the self-help organization and what it brought to them, able to become economically independent. And I will never forget, in the course of all of these women who were gathered there that late afternoon, First Lady asked them, "How has your life changed?" And one of them stood up, I can still see her all these years later, and she said, "I am no longer afraid. I am not afraid of the police. I am not afraid of my husband, and I am not afraid of my mother-in-law." Now, in India, that is true empowerment. And SEWA today is working in collaboration with governments, with the private sector, adopting some of the most up-to-date practices and providing its members with a better future. I saw the transformative power of microcredit so much in so many different places, stretched far from each other. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it was one of the singular ways that former state employees, teachers, and doctors who were no longer being paid were able to engage in very tiny enterprises, micro enterprises, and sustain themselves and their families. Farther away in a Grameen village in Bangladesh, we gathered with women who had made that commitment to a borrowing unit as Grameen operates, and asked so many of them again what had happened in terms of their experience. And again, I can remember these very simple, almost illiterate people, but yet so powerful and strong and determined to change their lives. And one woman said, "Well, with my first loan, I got a milk cow. I paid the loan back. I've gotten training. Our family life is better. The children are better nourished. We even have milk left over that we sell. So I decided to get a second loan. And with the second loan, our conditions improved even more. I paid that loan back, as women are wont to do, to the envy of commercial lending institutions, because the repayment rate is something like 98%. And then she said, I got a third loan, and I decided to put my husband to work so the loan went for a rickshaw. Again, the wisdom of women who are improving their lives. And she was not dissimilar from a woman on the other side of the world in Chile who had been longing for the capital that she needed to get a high-powered sewing machine. And when she finally got it, she said, "I felt like a bird that flew out of its cage." And today she's a successful entrepreneur. She has hired employees into her thriving small business and been able to send her children to school. I also saw what incentives do to keep girls in school, often when their fathers especially, but their families generally, do not see the point. And often how these incentives prevent child marriage from occurring, a scourge that shortchanges millions of girls' lives. And I remember of hearing about the demand of a father who wanted to marry his daughter. She was still a child, but she was to be married to an older man. But the incentive that her family was provided in the girl's name would have an incredible impact so that she wouldn't be shortchanged and her potential would not go untapped. And what happened is the father and daughter negotiated his demand that she be married off. She wanted to stay in school. He wanted something else for her. And as this tug of war, if you will, went back and forth, she used her last card. And she said, "Well, if I have to go, I'm taking the cow." We have a theme of cows tonight. The cow was deeded to her in her name through an NGO and a process of incentives that had been established to keep girls in school. And the father said, "No, that cow belongs to us." And she said, "No, that cow is mine." And as this little debate went on, he finally said, "Well then, the cow can't leave, so I guess you won't be married, you can stay in school." And I've seen how norms can change. We talk about norms being so intractable, and they are in many ways. But no matter how entrenched they are, there are ways to begin to chip away. And in Senegal, years ago, we met Molly Melching for the first time. She was teaching in a USAID program for democracy building. And we watched as these local villagers were demonstrating through a skit the processes of democracy, raising their hands, voting, arguing, debating, etc. And she told us that after they had gone through this program, the women came up to her and they said, "What do you do with this thing called democracy?" And she said, "Well, do you have anything in your life you want to see changed? Do you want to try to get from a different place?" And they start talking about FGM, or female genital cutting, as some refer to it. They said it was harmful. It was degrading. It was painful. Many died in childbirth as a result of it. And she said, "Well, let's see how we can work through a process." And at first they went to the imam in their village who said there was nothing in the Quran that mandated this practice. They then went to the elders and told the village chief their concerns. And a process, a grassroots process, went on until they had persuaded each other that that village should not continue this practice. And the norm shifted from the practice to the health and well-being of the women and girls as the greater value. And then it was the men in the village who recognized that they intermarry, and so they went to other villages to explain how they had made this decision. It was the men being instrumental in this process, the religious leaders and the chiefs, and on, village after village in Senegal, working to eliminate this practice. And I remember at one point meeting the president because a law had been passed against it, and he wisely said, "It wasn't me, it was those villagers." And so I've seen how even the most difficult issues, with the kind of work that global development specialists engage in, can be dealt with. And I've seen so many women around the globe who are on the front lines of change, even in the most difficult places, as with the Arab revolutions that we've seen and the kind of pushback that they've endured in many places. But I remember well Tawakkol Karman, who got the Nobel Peace Prize a couple years ago, in Yemen, doing the hard work that she was doing, saying to me, "The women in my country woke up, and they are not going back to sleep, no matter how hard it is." These are truly the vital voices of our time. In India today, there are over 1 million women and village councils, panchayat councils, involved in local government through a quota that initially unleashed their ability to participate, and today they are running for positions far beyond any of the quota numbers. And they have told me in many places what it's been like to go up against the conventional leadership, often corrupt, go up against the misappropriation of public resources instead of investing in education and sanitation and health as they are. And the studies today show, those that have been done on the women in these village councils across India, that they are making a positive difference. And I think, too, about the women in peacemaking and peace building who are rarely included at the peace tables, where they so belong but cannot be accepted so often. And it was like Baroness Gowdy mentioned Northern Ireland, where I first saw how women struggled to be taken seriously. They were marginalized, both in the economy and marginalized in terms of politics. They weren't allowed to participate in any of the political parties, and so they created their own, the Women's Coalition. And through an anomaly that was part of the peace process, they managed to get elected and to have a seat at the table. And their contributions to that peace agreement were incalculable and have stood the test of time. I just returned from Burma last week, and there too, after years of violence and conflict in the ethnic regions, which in some places still continue as this peace process and ceasefires go forward, the women there too are struggling to be a part of that process. And if they do not succeed, it is unlikely that Burma will confront and have the kind of future that so many there are aspiring to after 5 decades of isolation. But I can't spend the night going on with all of these stories, as many as there are. But I want to make a point of how much these experiences have influenced my own thinking on development. During the 4 years that I was privileged to serve as the first U.S. ambassador for global women's issues, we recognize that women and girls are critical to advancing social, economic, and political progress everywhere. As Secretary Clinton has often said, investing in the potential of women to lift and lead their societies is one of the best investments we can make. One of the earliest studies on girls' education was done by a then very young economist at the World Bank by the name of Larry Summers. That study has stood the test of time. He showed why educating girls is one of the most effective development investments, because she educates a family and a community. It leads to better nutrition and the education of her own children. It leads to spacing in her family and to a higher income for her. So the United States put women front and center in development, as well as in the promotion of economic opportunity and peace and security. A few years ago, when Secretary Clinton issued the first quadrennial report on development and diplomacy, the so-called QDDR, something the Department of Defense had always done or had done for scores of years, but none of the other agencies had, there was a little questioning of why she was pursuing this process. But she sought to elevate development and incorporate it into the United States global engagement strategy, together with diplomacy and defense. She also underscored the fact that women were a key pillar of development, and so USAID and the State Department issued gender guidance in these areas to ensure greater effectiveness in our work. And I'm so pleased to say that Secretary Kerry, as he has just announced the next QDDR review, has underscored the role of the gender guidance and also issued his own installment of the gender guidance, putting forward a very powerful statement. Let there be any doubt that what was then, and what is now is different. What was then, and what is now continues. And I think this is a very powerful statement in terms of United States leadership on these issues. I want to discuss briefly the importance of gender integration in areas not generally viewed as women's issues. Feed the Future, for those of you who work in this space, is seeking to strengthen the world food supply. Women are vital to the ag sector. In many developing countries, they're the backbone of the economy, and they comprise the majority of the small farmers, yet their work is usually not counted as economically active employment. You know the reality. Women produce half the world's food, earn 10% of the world's income, and own less than 1% of the property. They do not have equal access to resources, and this significantly limits their productivity. It's not a question of their being lazy. It's a question of their access to what they need. They are often at a severe disadvantage when it comes to training, to fertilizer, to tools, to the credit they need to purchase what they need for output, and most especially land rights. So a few years ago, the FAO produced its annual report on the vital role that women play in agriculture and showed that when women farmers are provided equal resources, equal to those of their male counterparts, their yields are also equal. According to the FAO, if the gap were closed, women farmers could increase their individual yields by 20 to 30%, and in turn improve agriculture production between 2.5 and 5%. And this is the kicker, and reduce the number of undernourished people by 150 million globally. That is the potential we are still not tapping. And that is why Feed the Future has been integrating gender into all aspects of the program and measuring results to ensure that goals are being met. Second, we have a lot of progress or hopeful progress these days on climate change. But so often the role of women's participation in both adaptation and mitigation is not recognized. Women are the primary users, managers, and stewards of natural resources. We often hear how severely affected they are by climate changes, but rarely do we hear how critical they are to addressing these challenges. And they are doing this at the community level, although it is not figuring significantly into the policies and initiatives that have been adopted to deal with the challenge. And this is another way that we've got to work to integrate gender into an issue that is not significantly seen as a women's issue. A third area is technology, which has the potential to transform the lives of women by providing critical access to information, mitigating health and safety risks, and creating an opportunity for financial security and independence. It is not a luxury, but an essential tool to enable poor women to transform their lives. The simple cell phone is being used to protect women from violence, which I saw firsthand in the DRC, where it's being utilized as an alert system. Because rape there, as we all know, is a tool of that horrific conflict that has been raging for more than a decade. It is also being used to help small entrepreneurs and farmers with access to information on market on a given day, saving them from walking needlessly for hours, informing them of the weather forecasts. One woman said that I would have walked and walked only to find out there was no market. She said, today I've established a second business because I've got so much time to do more. All because she's been able to have access to a cell phone and use it. In other places, it's being used for citizens' empowerment to expose official corruption. And as this technology develops, its greatest impact will be mobile banking. The great majority of the poor today are unbanked, and the majority of the poor who are unbanked are women. Through the cell phone banking, they are able to save their earnings safely and engage in financial transactions. But the biggest challenge we have is there's a gender gap in mobile. For some 300 million women in low and middle income countries, access to the phone is out of reach. And that's why the State Department and USAID teamed up with the Trade Association for Mobile Operators, GSMA, to cut that gap in half and to help businesses realize that they can make a profit, even marketing to the bottom of the pyramid. Financial inclusion is critical if women are to advance economically. MasterCard, for example, is using its technology platform, the electronic form of payments, like prepaid and debit cards, that are connected to formal bank accounts and drive women's economic independence. I heard the other day about a husband of a woman who had an account in one of those banks made in that way. And her husband came to the bank and he insisted to the bank officials that he have access to that money. And the bank official said no, this account was in his wife's name and it was only for her utilization. Word had clearly gotten out because next day there were hundreds of women lined up at that bank to open accounts. So through transfers of social benefit programs for cash to debit cards, not credit cards, they are not only enabling women to access the benefits, but also cutting fraud to zero. These are some of the exciting technological developments that are occurring today that can have a transformative impact on the poor and particularly on poor women. There's also a gender gap in the internet. Intel's study found that there's an enormous internet gender gap in the developing world, which, if not reversed, will push women farther behind and unable to tap the social and economic benefits of having access to the internet in this 21st century. And so many of the tech companies today are sponsoring programs like Intel's She Will Connect to provide that kind of training to close the digital divide. And fourth, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the role of women in peace and security. A few years ago, President Obama launched the first ever United States National Action Plan in this space on these issues, the result of an intensive interagency process that included State Department, USAID, and Defense among the three primary participants. It produced a roadmap to accelerate and institutionalize U.S. efforts across government through our development programs, our diplomacy, and our military operations. to advance women's participation in making and keeping peace, as well as engaging in post-conflict rebuilding. And this holds true for so much that is happening around the globe today, from Afghanistan to South Sudan. At the Institute at Georgetown, we are focused to providing strong research foundations on these issues, bringing together thought leaders with practitioners, and using the university's platform for timely discussions. Alyse has done a beautiful tribute to Carol when we opened the program this evening. It was Carol Lancaster who was instrumental with Secretary Clinton in creating the Institute. I knew Carol well. I worked with her as a member of the White House staff when she was Deputy Administrator of USAID. For those of you who remember, the early 90s were not a kind time to USAID. It was under siege by those who wanted to close it down. Carol was critical to its survival. I remember the memos that we were able to get to the president to understand the facts behind what was happening. She was one of the most respected thought leaders in global development and one of his fiercest advocates. You did not want to tangle with Carol Lancaster over global development. So we miss her greatly, but she left a giant footprint for good, and we are all the better for knowing her. I said at her memorial that I never knew someone who could, in one breath, give you the statistics for maternal mortality in South Asia, and in the next breath, tell you about the medicinal qualities of spicy food. But that was Carol. She was so much in one person. As we embark on the 2015 Development Agenda, there remains, in my view, a continuing need for a standalone gender equality and women's empowerment goal, and this will be and has been much discussed as we move forward to the end of the MDGs. Although such a goal currently exists, we have failed to integrate gender concerns throughout all of the areas and goals. I've long said it is difficult to comprehend how the existing MDG 3 for gender equality and women's empowerment, can be so ignored in many ways, because it's impossible unless it's realized to also realize preventing and bringing down the rates of maternal mortality, as well as acting on hunger. If women's concerns, participation, and perspectives are not fully integrated, targets and indicators for gender equality need to be clearly identified throughout all priority areas and those goals acted on. And I hope you will be part, if you haven't been already, of this debate as it moves forward. Let me end with 3 paradigm shifts that I believe are taking place today on these issues. In my view, they should influence the way we think, the way we pursue solutions, and embrace opportunities in global development. First, data. Data is creating the evidence-based case for the proposition that investing in women and girls is a high-yield investment. For example, in the areas of economic opportunity, jobs creation, and shared prosperity, there is a growing body of research, from the World Economic Forum to the World Bank to that produced by so many companies in the private sector, that show the way that women invest their incomes has a multiplier effect. We know that closing the gender gap in economic participation creates more prosperous economies and countries. We know that women-owned SMEs are accelerators for growth and jobs creation. So clearly, this is the right thing to do. That is foundational. But we also know it is the smart and strategic thing to do. Secondly, Women are agents of change in their societies. They are not victims. They are victimized and violated in incalculable ways. Violence against women is a global scourge. But as a woman said to me one night in Kabul, stop looking at us as victims and look at us as the leaders that we are. And I thought to myself how right she is if my lens through which I look at women, no matter where they are, is as victims, then I don't see them as the change makers and leaders that we are. As it turned out, I got an email. I received an email today from the woman who said this to me, Orsula. She has been in school in England for the last year, and she wrote to me to say that she was finishing her studies and that she was looking with horror on what was happening just in the last few weeks in Afghanistan and Pakistan in terms of the terrible, as she put it, inhuman, sick-minded creatures and what they are doing. And this is what she said: no matter how many of us are sacrificed, there is still hope for continuation of the good. My decision is to return home, and that decision is firm. It has become even stronger since these efforts of systematically trying to intimidate and threaten our lives, so that we will leave our country and the region to those who want to do evil things. This will not happen, and I want you to know that I am returning home. She is clearly a leader and not a victim, and there are so many like her. Women are not just beneficiaries of development, but a vital force for change that should greatly influence our development policies. Lastly, and this shift is one that I think is highly representative of in this audience, we increasingly recognize the value of public-private partnerships. No sector has a monopoly on all the competencies and all of the resources to address our common challenges. It is in coming together in cross-sectoral collaborations that we create and leverage winning solutions. At the State Department, we encouraged a range of partnerships to advance women and girls. As Luis said tonight, we know that poverty would be 30% higher in Latin America were it not for women's economic participation. We sought to grow women's entrepreneurship there and around the globe. At the Summit of the Americas, with a group of partners, we launched We Americas, Women's Economic Empowerment. Walmart, which has an enormous initiative on women's economic empowerment, partnered with the State Department on training for women in the region at the SME level. Other partners came together as well to grow this missing middle, SMEs, where economies grow, and also work to create a vibrant network of entrepreneurs. Companies are increasingly sourcing from women-owned businesses and growing the women's markets. And the IDB in this case helped the financial institutions create the kind of support that is so needed in terms of access to capital. This is a win-win strategy. It is not unique, but it's a strategy that contributes to sustainability and to scaling. So I'm confident that in the weeks and months to come, we will continue to make even greater progress. And I know that SID will continue to play a growing role in engendering development in all of these areas. So as we mark 20 years next year since the Beijing Women's Conference and the Platform for Action that was adopted, as we mark 15 years of the MDGs and the next transition, and as we mark 15 years of the Security Council's resolution linking women to peace and security, let us look back rightly on the progress that we have made together. And let us go forward and complete the unfinished agenda and chart a better future for all, for women and men, for girls and boys everywhere. Because, as has been said, in the rising of the women is the rising of us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Verveer. You truly are an exceptional person. Before closing tonight, I just want to take a moment to thank the sponsors and all of our members of SID for your support, because you make tonight special, you make our community special, and you make all the work we do possible. I also want to thank the staff of SID who did all this work behind the scenes to make tonight possible. But most importantly, I want to thank all of you and all the organizations that are represented here tonight. As you've heard, there's challenges and opportunities in development going on right now, and all of you are making a truly positive impact on the future. So thank you very much for all you do for development. Happy holidays and safe travels home.